You know there's a good chance that at some point in your life you've gotten a cut bad enough to need stitches. It's almost a universal experience, right? But have you ever really stopped to think about what's going on there? That little needle and thread? Well, they're the result of thousands of years of medical history. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the amazing art and science of sewing up a wound.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute basics. What even is a suture? Well, put simply, it's a stitch. Its job is to hold body tissues together after you've been injured or had surgery. The key goal here is something called apposition, which is really just a fancy way of saying bringing the edges of the wound together nice and neat so your body can take over and do its healing magic.
So here's what we've got on tap for this explainer. We'll kick things off with what a suture is actually meant to do. Then, we're going to peek inside the surgeon's toolkit. After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how you actually stitch a wound. And finally, we'll follow the whole process through to the end, the journey from a fresh stitch all the way to a healed scar.
All right, let's start with the why. What are we really trying to do when we put in a suture? Because it's about a whole lot more than just closing a gap.
You know, a really good suture job is a masterclass in control. It's about bringing those wound edges together with just the perfect amount of tension. You don't want it too tight, and you definitely don't want it too loose. It helps stop the bleeding, it creates a physical barrier to keep nasty infections out, and ultimately, by creating that ideal healing environment, the goal is to leave behind the best-looking, most functional scar possible. Now, to pull all that off, you need the right tools for the job. So let's go ahead and open up the kit to see what's inside. When you get right down to it, it's really about 3 core items. First, you've got the needle holder. Think of it as a super specialized pair of pliers that gives the surgeon incredible control. Then there's the suture needle itself, which comes in a dizzying array of shapes and sizes. And of course, the suture material, the thread, which honestly is where a huge amount of the science comes into play.
Okay, this is where it starts to get really interesting. This is the first big choice a surgeon has to make about the thread itself. On the left, you're looking at a monofilament suture. The best way to think of this is like a single strand of fishing line. It's super smooth and just glides right through tissue. Then on the right, you've got a multi-filament suture, which is much more like a braided rope, made up of lots of smaller fibers all woven together.
So why pick one over the other? Well, it's all about trade-offs. That smooth monofilament passes through tissue with less friction and, really importantly, has fewer little nooks and crannies for bacteria to hide in, so there's less risk of infection. But because it's so slick, the knots can be a little less secure. The braided multifilament, on the other hand, is a dream to handle and it holds knots beautifully. But that braided texture could potentially harbor more bacteria, so it's always a choice.
All right, the next huge choice is this. Should the stitch dissolve on its own or not? Absorbable sutures are pretty amazing. They're designed to be broken down by your body's own enzymes over time. They are perfect for stitching up deep internal layers where you obviously can't go back in later to take them out. Non-absorbable sutures are for when you need that strength long-term, like for closing the skin. Your body will either just wall them off, or, as you probably know, you go back to the doctor to get them removed once you're healed up.
Okay, so we've got our tools, we've picked our materials, now let's get to the how. Because suturing isn't just sewing, it's a super precise skill, an art form really, with its own fundamental rules.
These are basically the golden rules. You always grab the needle at a very specific point to get the most control. You always enter the skin at a 90-degree angle. That's what helps the edges of the skin come together perfectly without rolling in. And you place every single stitch the same distance from the wound and at the exact same depth on both sides. That precision is what makes sure the tension is perfectly even, which is absolutely critical for good healing.
So just like a great chef has different knives for different jobs, a surgeon has a whole arsenal of different stitching techniques. We're just going to take a look at a few of the most common patterns you're likely to see. First up, this is the real workhorse, the simple, interrupted suture. Each stitch is its own little procedure. You go in, come through, tie the knot, and snip the thread. The huge advantage here is security. If one of these stitches happens to break, no big deal. The rest of the wound stays securely closed. It's strong, it's reliable, and you see it used all the time in emergency situations.
Next, we've got the simple continuous suture, which is often called a running stitch. This one is way faster because you're using one long piece of thread, creating a whole line of stitches without stopping to cut and tie each one. And what it does brilliantly, as you can see, is distribute the tension very, very evenly all the way down the wound.
Okay, now we're leveling up a bit. The vertical mattress suture is what you'd use for deeper wounds. It's this really cool far, near pass with a needle.
That first far pass grabs the deep tissue and closes up any empty space down below. And then the second near pass brings the top edges of the skin together perfectly. It's an amazing technique for both strength and a great cosmetic result.
So, no matter what stitch pattern you use, it all comes down to this, the knot. The knot is the anchor for the entire repair. And every single surgical knot has these three basic parts. You've got the loop, which is actually holding the tissue, the knot itself, which provides all the security, and the ears, which are just the little cut ends of the thread.
And yup, you guessed it, even the knots come in different styles for different jobs. The square knot on the left is the classic, old reliable choice. But for sutures that are under a lot of tension, or maybe the thread is a little slippery, a surgeon will often use a surgeon's knot. See that extra twist in the first loop? That creates more friction to stop the knot from slipping while the rest of it is being tied. Pretty clever, right?
So the wound is closed. Job's done, right? Well, not quite. The final phase of all this is just as important as the procedure itself. Let's take a look at what happens next.
Have you ever wondered why stitches on your face come out so much sooner than stitches on, say, your knee? Well, this table explains it all. It comes down to blood supply. Areas with fantastic blood flow, like your face, heal incredibly quickly. But areas that are under more tension or have less blood flow, like your leg, just need more time for that new tissue to build up strength before you take the support away.
Now, even with all this science and technique, things can still go wrong. The suture material itself could break, a knot could slip, or one of those absorbable sutures could dissolve way too fast. And of course, if you take the stitches out too early, the wound can just pop right open again. This is exactly why a surgeon's technique and your own follow-up care are so important. But here's the flip side. There's also a risk if you leave them in for too long. Your body sees a suture as a foreign object, and the skin can actually start to heal around the thread. When that happens, you're left with those classic railroad track stitch marks. So getting them out right on time is key for the best possible result.
And that really brings us to our final thought. For thousands of years, a needle and thread was pretty much the only option. But today, we've got surgical staples, we have skin glues, we have adhesive tapes. Many of these are faster, and in some cases, they work just as well. Which leaves us with a really big question. Is this ancient, intricate art of suturing still the undisputed champion of wound closure, or is its reign finally coming to an end?